They want to show the world it's no use fighting. Look, everybody, even he can't crack the maze, and he's helped build it. The system is rigged. They want us to think it'll protect us, but that's a lie. We protect us. We do. Nobody else. Not the companies, not the scientists, not the government, us.
Here is a motion picture film. Let's tidy up this tangle of film by putting it on a reel.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to Film Swap. My name is David Seeley, and Film Swap is people. And when you're talking about people, there's no finer people than my ecstatic co-host, Mr. Jonathan Pritchard Barrett, the ecstatic gaucho himself. Jonathan, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thank you very much for that introduction, David.
Well, it's all true. And today we've got a really great show because we are talking about disaster.
We are.
But it's not just any kind of disaster, it's ecological disaster.
We're going green.
We are going green. And yes, and we'll be nibbling away at some very interesting subject matter tonight because we're talking about two really, really interesting films that have an ecological theme tonight.
Yes.
Jonathan, why don't you very briefly just tell the listeners a little bit about the first film, your choice for our film swap tonight?
Well, my film is Dark Waters, directed by Todd Haynes and released in 2019, starring Mark Ruffalo. And it's
who's
sort of,
also played a big green guy.
He has played a bit. He's definitely gone green. He played the Hulk, of course, the Incredible Hulk. And it's a legal thriller all about sort of pollution and things like that.
Brilliant.
Very green.
And it's a very interesting film and a very interesting story based on real life case of
events,
corporate malfeasance.
Exactly what it
And
is.
so the film that I've put forward tonight is a film called Soylent Green, and it's from 1973 and stars the late great Charlton Heston. Sorry, I was going to call him Chuck there for a minute.
Chuck Heston.
I always call him Chucky Heston.
I'm sure his friends and family called him Chuck.
but it's Charlton Heston, and he it was directed by Richard Fletcher, and it is a very much a classic dystopian nightmare vision of the future. Should we suffer from continual pollution and ecological catastrophe?
Yes.
So those are the two films that we're going to talk about tonight. It's sort of like a future dystopia and sort of like a film, a more recent contemporary film that sort of talks about how we could end up in such a situation as Soylent Green portrays. So on that cheery note, let's take a very, very brief break. And we're going to be right back to talk about our first film, Todd Haynes, 2019, Dark Waters.
Yes.
So we'll be right back.
You can follow the Film Swap on social media. We're on Twitter and TikTok at Film Swap UK, on Instagram at Film Swap Media, and on YouTube at Film Swap_podcast, and at Facebook at Film Swap the Podcast.
And we're back. Welcome back, listeners, and welcome back, Jonathan. Would you like to tell the viewers or listeners, a little bit about Dark Waters.
Dark Waters. It's, well, before I'd seen the film, I'd never heard of this case, but I got a feeling it's much better known in the United States. But somehow it just hasn't been reported over here. But basically, it's based on a New York Times story called "The Lawyer Who Became DuPont's Worst Nightmare." And if you didn't know who DuPont is, it's one of the largest sort of chemical corporations in the world. It's an American corporation, and their slogan is "Better Living Through Chemistry." Also used by Fatboy Slim for the title for his first album, a different type of chemistry. So this lawyer is a chap, a real person called Robert Billot, and he starts investigating the contamination of the sort of groundwater in this town in West Virginia, and basically uncovers an incredible scandal of these horrible chemicals that have been killing animals and people, actually. Yeah, it's an extraordinary story, and it's directed by Todd Haynes. He's actually better known for he's a sort of key figure in the new queer cinema sort of movement. I don't know if it's a movement, but new queer cinema, and he's known for films like Carol, The Velvet Underground, and I'm Not There. Far From Heaven is possibly his best known film. I'm not sure.
Well, I quite like that one he did, Safe, it's called, isn't it? The one with Julianne Moore, and that's a really great film about
I haven't
a
seen that
woman
film.
who, and it's actually quite similar to this, is that she has some sort of a reaction to chemicals and things in food and in the atmosphere and stuff, and it causes her all sorts of health problems, and then she goes away and lives in a retreat.
Okay.
Away from her family, and that is a really brilliant film. I think that might be the first film of his that I saw.
Right.
And it is absolutely brilliant. I highly recommend that one.
I haven't seen that one yet. Well, I guess possibly his best known film is Far From Heaven, which is terrific film, and it stars Julianne Moore and Dennis Quaid, and it's slightly based on a Douglas Sirk's sort of work, but it sort of makes it a bit more contemporary. Perhaps says things that Douglas Sirk couldn't say about sexuality and things like that, and because he made films in the 50s. And
he had to cleverly skirt around such things.
Douglas Sirk had to cleverly skirt around such things, and Todd Haynes can address them.
Yes.
Exactly. And I suppose in this is a story of a lawyer who doesn't carefully skirt around things. He sort of wades in, basically.
He does, indeed. He's a corporate lawyer, isn't he? Generally lives in a culture where they enable large corporations and businesses and, the movement of capital and all that. But when he is approached by a man who knows his grandmother and lives in the community where he grew up, he is suddenly hit with some conscience when he learns some hidden truths about some of the practices of DuPont, which is one of the companies that they represent, the firm that he works for represents.
Yes, and so he's not really meant to, from his bosses would rather he didn't take this case on, but he does. And he starts digging, and he goes out to these sort of farms and investigates the case. And one of the sort of, I guess, the key thing sort of is that the key events is that the DuPont, he subpoenas them, he asks for all this sort of information, and they sort of dump boxes and boxes and boxes, cardboard boxes of sort of documents on him.
Yeah,
And
in an attempt to kind of bury him in so much stuff that they're hoping he won't find the little hidden nuggets of information and all of that too.
exactly.
That will bring the truth to light.
Yes, but he manages to sort of winnow the wheat from the chaff and somehow finds out basically what's going on. And he asks some people, and he finds out that DuPont had been polluting West Virginia and for a long time, and sort of burying all this sort of evidence of their sort of wicked ways, and it's quite a story. Really, quite shocking that this has been going on.
It is amazing. I mean, for me, the most central part of the film is that bit kind of halfway when we've been building up to his studying all these documents and talking to this farmer and learning more and more details. And then there's a really great moment that's very effective when his wife he wakes his wife up in the middle of the night because he's rooting around in the kitchen trying to dig out pots and pans and things cause, and she comes out kind of going, well, what are you doing? It's the middle of the night. Are you crazy? And then he sits down and he starts to tell the story of the history of this chemical and its sort of initial manufacture.
Yeah.
And then how it then progressed into the kind of consumer marketplace and started impacting, and also how the company decided to dispose of the waste and then cover up some of the facts that they themselves knew about the toxicity of this material that they were creating. And it's quite extraordinary. I mean, that's that shocking little moment when they say about how when they were beginning to understand that this stuff was toxic, they actually laced some cigarettes and gave them to some of their staff as an experiment. And you just think what an absolutely shocking, and unbelievable, nasty thing to do.
Yeah,
to
brazen.
Just basically, without even asking their permission, to conduct an experiment on these men is absolutely just mind-boggling. They were taking people without their consent and using them as guinea pigs knowing full well that they could come to harm.
Yep.
So it's quite an absolutely extraordinary, gobsmacking bit of information that really cuts to the chase of the matter, really, doesn't it?
Yeah,
It
is absolutely extraordinary. This this case, and the sort of the idea is that these are forever chemicals. Basically, once they're sort of out in the environment, they never break down.
That's right. Yeah.
And so they're I mean, apparently everything and everyone contains forever chemicals in them.
And plastics and all these things.
Yeah, but even every human on Earth basically has forever chemicals in them.
Yeah.
And so
it's in the food chain and in the water supply and in the groundwater and in the, in the soil. All this stuff just sticks around, hangs around for potentially centuries, I guess, decades, centuries.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure. Definitely long enough, quite a long time. And I guess one of the things that came to mind when I was watching it is that it has elements of Southern Gothic in there. It has these sort of eccentric characters, decayed and derelict settings, grotesque situations, and crime and violence and poverty. This film definitely has all this in there, and it's, I guess, one of the things that you really get is the colours. So he's really, I mean, I'm not don't know about the way you do colours like you do, David, but he seems to use lots of filters, heavy filtration. Yes. And so there's some of it's very blue, and then he goes into hospital and it's very yellow, and the whole thing's rather sort of sickly feeling.
Certainly the bits in the farm are great because they have that kind of blue, cold bluish, and all the grass and everything has this kind of decaying quality, and there's the bits when it's snowing and things as well, and it does have a really beautiful look to it.
Yes.
I mean, when I say beautiful, I mean in the sense of artistically beautiful, but obviously the subject matter and the setting and the circumstances aren't beautiful.
No, exactly. And one of the funny things about the film is that it doesn't seem to have, it always seems to be in winter. And it goes over sort of 10, 15 years of his investigations. But there was absolutely no leaves on the trees. Whenever he leaves the office or leaves
Everything
the
looks
house.
dead, like autumnal or like sort of late autumn.
Yeah, definitely wintry. Certainly early, maybe no doesn't get into summer anyway. Late autumn, early spring, winter, and I did slightly feel like give us some. I was sort of gagging for a leaf, basically, or some greenery.
Right.
That was.
Sorry, I thought you meant something else when you said you were gagging for a leaf. I thought maybe you were referring to a
cigarette. No, I just wanted to see some. It just felt. Well, I guess the point was it's oppressive.
Yes.
And but still summer, even when people are polluting, summer does happen, and I slightly felt like I could have done with some summer, seeing some summer there. But anyway, I guess that's a minor quibble, really. And yeah, it's a terrific film. It also reminded me of, I guess, these sort of legal thrillers, like with sort of corporate malfeasance, like Erin Brockovich is probably the most famous. But also Silkwood, which has Meryl Streep in it. It's a terrific movie.
Yeah, that's a very good one. I haven't seen that for a very long time, but I remember it being very good.
Yeah.
And that this whole attitude of these sort of criminal acts and things are brought to the attention, how there is this whole sort of culture. Which is very true of sycophancy, isn't there? About the idea that people don't want to kind of bite the hand that feeds them.
Yeah.
And they all sort of, act in their own self-interest and they're not very courageous when it comes to sort of bringing, whistleblowing or bringing things to the attention of the authorities, or just publicly, because they don't want to upset their bosses, or in the sense, I mean, when you talk about oppressive atmosphere, there's that terrific scene when he's driving back through the town and there's all these DuPont signs.
Yes.
And even the community center is called the DuPont Community Center.
Yeah.
And you can see how these large companies sort of ingratiate themselves into communities by doing that. They do a little bit of sort of localized investment. And a lot of the people in that area will work for the company. So there's there's an undercurrent of that everyone's kind of livelihoods and their economy depends on this business.
Yeah.
So when there's some people who step forward to say, well, there's a problem here, the community sort of turns on them and says, what are you doing rocking the boat? Because we got a good thing going here. Just shut your mouth and stay out of trouble. Keep your head down. So there's that really, kind of attitude about it which is part, that is really a part of the problem in society in general, isn't it? That, like, I used the term enabling at the beginning, but it's very true that a lot of times people in their own sort of self-interest in their jobs and things will by staying silent or not being critical, they enable these sorts of situations to develop.
Yeah,
don't they?
They do, and that is very much what happens here. I guess yes, it's the system is rigged. That's the idea, isn't it?
Yes.
And people, they're likely. I mean, they don't want to be part of the Rust Belt, essentially. And when you mention that sequence where he drives through West Virginia and sees all these DuPont signs. That is really, to me, it had a little element of humor because it's not a very funny film, it has to be said. But that one, because it has humor, because the music is John Denver's Country Roads, and the lyrics go, "Country roads take me home, West Virginia." So basically,
Yeah.
I guess this is for a Brit anyway, where sort of West Virginia is fairly unfamiliar. You've got this the most famous mention of West Virginia in sort of popular culture is being sort of turned on its head, basically, to sort of as now West Virginia is not country roads take me home; it's somewhere you really wouldn't want to be necessarily. Which is quite witty. And another thing
to visit that other point again about the way that these companies sort of ingratiate themselves into communities. They just bring to mind to me, like there was stories recently in Scotland about how companies that do weapons manufacturing are sort of paying to give presentations in schools. And you see things like that all the time where there's corporate sponsorship of sort of cultural events and educational institutions and things like that. And that kind of what that really brought home to me is about how our culture is taken over by these vested interests who have the finger on even the education and all those sorts of things. So it's quite a telling moment when he drives down that street and you see that.
Yes, well, I mean, I guess the classic example now is the Sackler wing of the National Gallery. I think it's that, which is, and they were sort of peddling all this these opiates in the US, but they were great sort of philanthropists as well. But I mean, it's another thing that occurred to me was that Mark Ruffalo, whose name always makes me think of a rough Gruffalo somehow. A rough buffalo, sorry. Anyway, seems to be a sort of a mix of those two words. But anyway, he is sort of often is quite a sort of handsome character. But in this one, it is not the sexy Mark Ruffalo. He's very much a sort of everyman, and he's, I mean, a terrific performance as well as this sort of.
He's a very good actor. I quite like him. He's been in a lot of good stuff over the years.
Yeah.
And I don't think it was really till he got involved in the Marvel kind of franchise that he really became kind of a household name after that, didn't he? But I think before that, he was just one of those really good character actors who would kind of pop up in things. And I quite like him. And he is very, very good in this because he has that real sort of empathy, and you know he's very believable as someone whose conscience guides him.
Yeah, exactly. And another thing that sort of slightly occurred to me is that there's a certain amount of science in it because basically, this pollution is sort of using these chemicals are leaking essentially, and there is a sort of beginner's guide to chemistry in the film, but it's done in a way that even I could understand, somebody who isn't a chemist, and doesn't know much about chemical formulae and whatnot. And I think that was a sort of good quality, positive quality to the film as well.
I agree. It's done in a very accessible way. It tells a very kind of what could be a very complex story in a very accessible way, and does it. I mean, like I said, it builds up quite nicely to that middle section where he tells, and it kind of cuts between him telling the story to his wife and his boss, and maybe the man, the farmer, who first instigates the whole story at the beginning. and when he tells that narrative about the development and dissemination of this chemical and how we've ended up into the position we're in now, it's very, very, very beautifully done. And then the second half of the film is more about the litigation and the years of court battles and negotiations and things that went on. But again, it's all done in a very accessible way and really kind of plays like a thriller. Like it is very much like a sort of an exciting, interesting
it is a thriller.
story. Yeah.
It's a legal thriller.
Yeah, absolutely, and it really does a good job too at showing how how all the legal wrangling and the way that these things, because when people get ill and they're having these issues that are caused by this chemical, but they can't get satisfaction in things sort of immediately because there's this whole huge process that has to go on of establishing facts and liability and of course DuPont doesn't cooperate with any of this, and they have huge legal teams. Then they can spare no expense to invest in trying to put things off and to hamper things and try and stop things from happening. So that's quite a compelling sort of story to tell as well, because again, that kind of thing goes on all the time, doesn't it? These ways in which these companies can afford to, delay and cover up and avoid and put these things off, and that kind of puts it all into perspective. That the mechanisms that are in place for just your average working person to be able to affect change and have positive outcomes and things is very difficult because of the mismatch in the resources that they have to fall back on.
Well, it'd be fascinating to read the book or the article to find out more of the story, because I guess, he can't have just been doing this over 20 years. I'm sure he had other jobs sort of which were bringing in money.
The film implies that he becomes completely focused on this one thing.
Yeah.
And they even say at one point that he can't get other jobs because none of the other clients and things will go near him because of what's happened.
Yeah.
Because essentially at the beginning of the film, he essentially, his law firm works for DuPont and represent them. Yeah. And he sort of sneaks the lawsuit and everything kind of in the back door and sort of surprises them with it. So, and they're a client, so it was huge ramifications by doing that. I mean, again, this is a dramatic film, so I don't know how many, if any, liberties they took with the story for dramatic purposes.
I'd imagine they did.
Yeah, I mean that's inevitable when you're making a dramatic film. You're going to play with the facts a little bit.
Exactly. Another thing is that his wife, the protagonist, Robert Pilot, is played by Anne Hathaway.
Yeah.
And she also is not playing the sort of more usual Anne Hathaway role of a sort of very glamorous woman. And she's not. And she gives extraordinary performance as well, and it's interesting to see her in that sort of role, which is not something I've really seen before. Play before.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's where the film, though, I think falls a little bit on formula there too, doesn't it? Because we have this sort of obligatory scene of her getting cross with him because he's spending too much time obsessing about his work and stuff. And there's always those scenes in films like this, isn't there, where she sort of tells him off because you're not spending enough time with the kids, and you never ask how anyone is, and you never talk about anything, and you're all just obsessed with this case, and you don't want to deal with anything else, kind of thing. And that
is very much common. Yeah. In fact, I wrote down cliche: case affects his private life.
Exactly. So she has that kind of that role. I mean, throughout the film, though, to be fair, she also is the catalyst for ideas for him as well. Like sometimes she'll just sort of make offhand comments in the car or while they're having their sort of pillow talk in bed, and she'll sort of make a little comment, and that'll make him go, "Hey, wait a minute.
Yeah.
That's a great idea." And then he'll go off and find another way of approaching the problem. So she has that role of sort of inspiring him to improve his game or to find a solution to a problem that he maybe never thought of. So there is that element to it. And she's a very good actress as well. I quite like her as well.
She's very good.
And she is very good in this. But I think you're right. There are a couple of those kind of cliche, sort of formulaic kind of moments in it. And unfortunately, she's the one who is there in him.
Yeah. But it's definitely worth a watch, this film. I really enjoyed it. Yeah, it's a fascinating case, and Robert Billett is an extraordinary guy, and I definitely recommend it.
Yes, I concur. I think it's a really good film, really really interesting, and I did watch it when it first came out, I think, and it was nice to revisit it a couple of years later and watch it again, and it is really good. How did you watch it? Because I really don't know the status of this in terms of physical media release. I haven't looked, to be honest.
I watched it on Amazon Prime, I think.
Amazon Prime, yeah. Well, I watched it on the same. I rented it on Apple TV, and and actually this was just due to because of my work and other commitments and things. I actually did something which I very rarely, if ever, do. I actually watched this film on my iPhone on the train during my commute in and out of the city.
Not a very cinematic experience.
Yeah, so it's not normally how I would choose to watch a film, and I'm really not one for watching things on the train. I tend to listen to, podcasts or listen to music or things when I'm on the train because I don't like trying to watch things on screens. But I know a lot of people do it. I see them on the trains and the buses and things, looking at their phone, watching videos and things. Possibly they're watching the latest episode of Film Swap on YouTube or Spotify. But I don't know. I don't look over their shoulder to verify that.
I would.
But anyway, I did it it was really just because of time constraints in order for me to be able to get another viewing of the film in before we talked about it tonight.
Yeah.
So I watched it that way, and it was all right. I mean, because to be fair, this film, we talked a little bit about the color grading and the things like that, the look of the film, and it's very beautiful and everything. But to be fair, it isn't like a really, really, like last week we talked about Yugetsu, which is very cinematic and has a lot of really wonderful sort of filmmaking techniques, and performance as well was like that. But this film is a little bit more of a conventional sort of film. It doesn't have a lot of really flashy cinematic touches like that. So it was something that I think you can get away with watching it on a little small device. I
think that's probably old Todd Haynes' most conventional film.
It may be. I don't know. I'd have to think about that.
You haven't seen every single one.
I don't think I have seen all of his films, unfortunately. When I was looking at his, reading up on him a bit today, there are a couple of films there. As a matter of fact, even the one you mentioned with Dennis Quaid and Julianne Moore, I've not seen that actually.
Yeah. It's good. It's a good movie from what I can remember.
I might try and seek it out at some point actually, because it was when I was reading about it, I kind of thought, I don't think I've seen that one.
Yeah.
But I've seen most of the others, and I think he's very good. He's quite famous too for that. Like he did a film about
David Bowie.
Carpenter.
Karen Carpenter.
Karen Carpenter, but he did it all with like Barbie dolls or something.
Oh, is it? Oh, right.
And I remember that when that, like years ago when that came out, and it was a kind of quite a cool thing.
I was
and I
into
saw it
music.
at the time, but I haven't seen it since.
Yeah.
But, it was quite a long time ago.
Music and identity, which neither really figures in this. Those are his two sort of big things, I think, aren't they?
Mm.
But, yeah, it's still good, even if it's unusual for him.
Yeah, definitely. Well, anyway, I think on that note, I think we might move on. If Jonathan, unless there was anything.
Well, it's on Google Play, Amazon Prime, Apple TV, and YouTube.
Brilliant, and we're recording this in the summer, August of 2023. So if anyone's listening to this in the far-flung future, which we'll be visiting in just a moment, and perhaps in the times of Soylent Green, they'll still be listening to Film Swap, the Film Swap archives. And if you are listening to this sometime in the far-flung future, the films may or may not still be available on those streaming services. Yes, so just bear that in mind. If you want to watch it, now's the time to get in there and get it seen, because who knows what the future holds. But one possible scenario for what the future holds is what we're going to be talking about in just a minute. We're going to be back in just a moment after a very, very short break. And we are going to be talking about our second film, which is Richard Fletcher's 1973 science fiction classic called Soylent Green.
Absolutely, that's what it is.
You stay right where you are, folks, because we are going to be coming right back.
Thanks for listening to the Film Swap podcast. You can follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon, Audible, and Google Podcasts, or any of your favourite podcast catchers. If you like this podcast, please consider giving the show a rating or leaving a review. This helps other listeners find the show.
Belief. The evidence is overwhelming. He learned these facts, and they shook his sanity. The corporation knew he was not reliable anymore. They feared he might talk, and so he was eliminated.
And why are they doing this?
Because it's easier. I think expedient is the word.
And we're back.
And we are back. And not only are we back, but we're back in the far-flung future of 2022.
Yes.
Which is when our film tonight is set.
New York has a population of 40 million.
Whoa. That's a lot.
It's a lot of people.
Remind me to go and open a pizzeria or something in New York, because that's a huge customer base there, isn't it?
It's a huge customer base.
It's never too late for me to earn my fortune somehow, some way. So maybe I'll do that. I'll go to the future of 2022, which is when this film was set. So Soylent Green, it's a classic, isn't it? It's like this is a film that is pretty well known. It's mainly famous for the big reveal at the end. We learned something which I'm not, because there may be some listeners and viewers out there who have never seen Soylent Green, and I don't want to spoil it for them. No. So we got to try really hard not to give the big reveal.
Let's see if we can do it.
Yeah, I think,
get through this.
We're going to try really hard not to give the ending away. But this is one of those films that it's one of those famous films that's famous, but people haven't necessarily seen it. They've kind of, because they're familiar with the kind of the punchline at the end, and sort of the certain quotes and things from it, but they haven't necessarily seen it before. As a matter of fact, one of the people I work with, I mentioned today that I was going to be talking about Soylent Green, and they immediately went online and looked up a trailer, and they were like, I've never seen that before. And they
Really?
were sort of very intrigued about it when I told them about it.
Right.
So hopefully that will have that effect on some other people out there tonight as well when we talk about Soylent Green, because it is one of those films that um, I wouldn't say it's kind of like any kind of masterpiece or anything.
No.
If you know what I mean, it's not like last week we talked about Performance and Yugetsu, and we've talked about some really great classic
Yeah.
films that are truly great, kind of works of art, if you will.
Yeah.
I don't think Soylent Green is that, but I think what it is it's very, very, very entertaining and also very interesting film.
Yeah.
Um, so just a very brief introduction, if you need any more of an introduction than that, but it is basically set. This film was made in 1973, and so in 1973, the year 2022 would have seemed a very far away, like
Yeah.
50 years in the future. But now, obviously, it's 50 years later, and now the film it's one of those films like 2001 and Escape from New York and things like that have kind of passed the futuristic date that they portray in the film.
Yeah.
But what I found interesting about this is because we have a world that is overpopulated, and due to various sort of due to pollution and over
Consumption.
yeah, just we've basically run everything into the ground, and so the food supply has dried up. And a
Yeah.
lot of the people in this city, there's so many people that literally they live like some people, they're all homeless. Like the homeless population in this city is
Everybody
enormous, and
seems
every
enormous.
building, every stairway, every uh, archway, every under every bridge and in every alleyway, there's just people living, like literally just
Teeming.
people, yeah, just
Teeming
on
with
top
people.
of each other. So
Yeah.
literally there are scenes of people going up stairwells, and they have to literally climb over families who
Yeah.
are living on the stairs in
Yeah.
these buildings and stuff. So bad is the overpopulating.
Yeah.
And all these people, of course, there's no jobs, there's no there's not enough jobs, and there's no, the economy is in tatters. So everyone's living in poverty and hand to mouth.
Yeah.
And in this setting, we meet Charlton Heston's character, who is a police officer. And
Yes.
so he's someone who is very much like, I guess, he has a job and he has a flat somewhere to live. So he is, in that sense, one of the sort of, um,
Lucky
slightly
few.
more upper class than the people who are living out in the streets and have
Yeah.
no jobs and no food and things. But at the same time, he's still very much on the bottom rung of the
Definitely.
ladder socially, isn't he?
Yeah.
He's just the one step away from being one of those people out on the street.
Yeah.
But he does kind of, in a sense, he's not a particularly nice guy, is he? He's very cynical and jaded, and
Yeah.
he abuses his position as a policeman to get, he kind of basically just steals things from people's apartments, and he pushes people around and does all sorts of things.
Yeah.
So he's not necessarily like, at least in the beginning portions of the movie, he's not a particularly sympathetic person, is he?
No.
But you also understand why he's like that, because in this environment, it's kind of very much dog eat dog, every man
Yep.
for himself, isn't it?
It is. Yep. Yep. Exactly. Yeah.
So-
It's quite a film, because I think I saw it in the 80s or 90s, long time ago, and well, I think I enjoyed it, but now seeing it now is really interesting, especially when when the credits come up and it says or title card, New York City 2022. What? I didn't realize that. This is last year.
Yeah.
And which makes it sort of really more interesting now, because it's sort of like, well, what did they think the future was going to be 50 years ago?
Yeah. And what really struck me about it is how much, because it's interesting. Like I've probably seen this film, I don't know, like, sort of 10 times over the years. And I the first time I saw it was probably, when I was a teenager or
Yeah, I
something.
think the same with me.
And, and the thing is, when I originally saw it back all those years ago, it did very much feel like a science fiction film, like this
Yes.
sort of dystopian nightmare about this future where all this, the pollution and things have ruined the earth for everyone, and everyone's living in this terrible thing. But it felt a bit more like just science fiction.
Yeah.
But nowadays, watching it, it is almost like you can see they're not that far off track, are they? About potentially, you could see it seems more realistic, this vision now, than it did years ago when I first saw it as a young man.
I suppose so, yeah. There are definitely elements. There's things they got right and there's things they got wrong, I guess. And that's what's really interesting to see. Yeah, what did they think in the early 70s that was sort of wrong? Was potentially going to go wrong with the environment. And to me, one of the really interesting things is that they actually use the word the greenhouse effect.
They do indeed.
And I didn't realise that they were talking about it that early. I mean, I think I heard about it first in the sort of late 80s.
Yeah.
When they started, I think sort of, the mid to late 80s, they started talking about it when I was at school. And I didn't realise that sort of certain sort of more switched on people had been talking about it but before then. And
and two, like this is a good point to make, because to me this is what's striking, because this is a mainstream commercial film made by a big Hollywood studio, which is Warner Brothers. And or no, sorry, I think this was originally an MGM film, wasn't it? Or am I getting myself? Yeah, Metro Goldwyn Mayer. Sorry, it's part of Warner Brothers owns it now as part of they're the current rights holders to it, but it was originally an MGM film. But sorry, this was a major studio film with a major star in it.
Yeah.
And was a big box office hit in its day in 1973. But what's amazing is they are speculating on scientific ideas that were already part of popular discourse at the time in 1973.
Yeah.
So what's extraordinary is that we are now closer to this vision of the world than we are farther away from it, aren't we? Because we know now about the fact that all the plankton and stuff in the oceans is dying. And we know about the greenhouse effect, and all these things are, they're saying now that all these we're having these terrible heat waves and things like that are being brought on by global warming. So it's quite interesting to think that 50 years ago, in a mainstream popular piece of entertainment, they were already talking about these ideas and that people were aware of these concepts. Yet 50 years later, people are still arguing about it. People are still debating it. There hasn't been a lot of real sort of progress in taking steps to address some of these problems.
No.
And what's interesting is when you juxtapose this with the first film that we talked about tonight, which is a contemporary film talking about a fairly recent historical case where we know of this environmental catastrophe that was brought on by corporate sort of malfeasance and covering up these sort of this pollution and these sort of man-made pollutants and things. So I just find that really quite interesting to see that despite the fact that this is an old film, we haven't really moved, we haven't progressed very far in dealing with some of the ideas and the science and the things that they talk about in this film that came out in 1973.
That's true, but I would say probably the big difference is this film's very concerned with the idea of sort of overpopulation. So essentially, there's just humans everywhere. And as you say, he's having to step over these sort of families sleeping on the stairs and in the stairwell in order to get into his poky little flat. And and I think this was partly because sort of in the late 60s and 70s there was a sort of big concern about sort of population ballooning, and a book that came out in 1968 called The Population Bomb that sort of said that basically the human race is having too many babies, they need lots of resources, and we can't really provide the food and everything that they need. But actually, it's sort of the population has grown, but not quite as much as we thought. And certainly aren't people sort of sleeping in stairwells in the way that he has it in the film.
But we do have huge problems with sort of homelessness and things like that, and a huge disparity between sort of wealth, between the wealthiest and the poorest, which is kind of partly what this film portrays that.
Yes,
in a very extreme way.
That is true.
But we are probably not too far off it from that perspective either, are we?
Well, I mean, there is global sort of inequality. I mean, there is inequality. This film, the inequality is, well, very, very stark in this film. And but I would more going back to the population thing. I think now there's more concern with the depopulation. So
an aging population. Certainly in sort of more so-called developed countries where people, because more people aren't having as many babies and things like that, that now there is a concern that populations are aging, and that's going to cause its own sort of types of issues and problems as well.
Well, interestingly, in Japan this year or last year, the population went down by 700,000 people.
Wow.
So basically, I guess that means that brings a whole lot of problems on its own, and so that's sort of very much not what this film was sort of predicting. And then we think this is a sort of developed country issue. But then I learned that in Sri Lanka, the population growth rate there is a mere 2%, and you need more than 2% in order for replacement. In sort of the rich world, as it were, we can sort of import people where we've got a problem with sort of not having enough people to look after us as we get old. But in Sri Lanka, I guess that's going to be more of a problem. Yeah, that's an interesting sort of problem that this film didn't anticipate, or that people back in the 60s and 70s didn't really anticipate. But anyway, that's sort of a bit of a detour. It's one of the things I
part of what this film. These are some of the ideas and the themes that this film presents. And certainly these people live in a world like there's a great emphasis placed on the fact of the food supply, and the fact that only the wealthiest people have access to actual real meat and vegetables and consumer goods and things like that. All these things that kind of people take for granted. The world portrayed in this film is where all those things are now, even the most basic things like hand soap and things are the preserve of only the very wealthy.
Yes.
And this film deals a little bit with sort of corporate cover-up as well, because there is the main thrust of the narrative is around Charlton Heston stumbling upon, he's investigating a murder, and he then discovers a secret, which is the sort of the emphasis of the film, is his investigating this. And this is another case of a sort of a corporate cover-up of some
It is indeed,
some
yes.
information that is, they don't want the mass population to be aware of.
No. And this is something. One of the issues I had with the film, although I did enjoy it, and I enjoyed its sort of 70s-ness, if you put it like that. She plays a computer game at one stage, which is this huge, great sort of plastic thing. Looks amazing, like a sort of something out of, Clockwork Orange. Is the sort of plastic molding is very 70s, and but one of the things that I sort of had a bit of an issue with was, so one of the characters in it is Charlton Heston's roommate, who's played by Edward G. Robinson,
Yes.
who's I think best known for films in the sort of 30s and 40s,
Yes.
sort of gangster
Yes.
films.
Yes.
And when I mentioned it to Autumn, she said, "Oh, he's that little guy in all those 40s films, isn't he?"
Yes.
And
apparently this film was like his 100th film, or his 101st film. And I think it might be one of his last films as well. I'm not sure.
He died 2 weeks after they finished filming.
Yeah, well, there you go. So it was his last film, which is extraordinary. Because there's even on the Blu-ray, there's a little featurette that was released at the time to promote the film.
Oh, okay.
Where they celebrate that it's his 101st film.
Oh, really?
And they have a little party for him, and they filmed it, and sort of it was part of the promotion of the film.
Okay.
And so that's amazing. That I mean, may I say amazing, but you know what I mean. It's like extraordinary that he passed away just a couple of weeks after finishing.
Yeah, extraordinary. It is extraordinary. Yeah. But so basically, he's an old guy in the film, and he sort of ends up going to this. Well, I hope it's not too much of a. Perhaps I'd say spoiler alert. He ends up going to a
kind of a
sort of euthanasia center, basically.
Yeah. Yes.
But my issue was where did that come from? So suddenly, I mean, we were sort of investigating one thing, and then this is like a major sort of issue with the sort of culture that they're killing off old people essentially. But it wasn't mentioned.
Because you wouldn't think that in a situation like this, euthanasia would be much of an issue, because the life expectancy of the general population must be quite low in these circumstances. So you wouldn't have thought that there would be this setup. You're right, because it doesn't make a lot of sense, because why would they have this facility set up? And it's implied that it's a commercial enterprise, that people are paying money to come and be euthanized because they don't want to live anymore. So it's kind of a sanctioned suicide. But
yes.
But why would they have this in a situation where people, because it's made out too that Edward G. Robertson isn't a wealthy man. He shares a flat with Charlton Heston. He sort of works for him in a sense, because he's like they call him like a bookkeeper or whatever. But what he is he's kind of like a librarian.
Yes.
And he has access to books and other artifacts so he can look things up and find out information.
Yeah.
And so he's not like this big wealthy man who can afford to go out and have this procedure carried out.
No.
So I agree, it's a bit of an odd thing.
And also, you think something like this is ideal for creating dramatic tension in the story.
Yes.
So you've got this sort of euthanasia center, basically, which surely everybody's going to be scared of. It's going to be like, what's this? This looming sort of presence in the society, but it's not mentioned at all. Then suddenly, old Edward G. Robinson ends up there towards the end of the film. Like, what? What's that? Where did that come from then?
Yeah.
But anyway,
I agree with you. I don't think you want to overthink this thing too much in that sense. There's a lot of interesting ideas and things in it.
Yeah.
But it is kind of like just a big entertaining sort of science fiction story, and I probably wouldn't necessarily there is a lot of times when there is some contrivances in it in order to propel the plot to its conclusion, and the big shocking reveal at the end. And Yes, I agree with you. I mean, the ending kind of reminds me too of like a film that was released a few years later, the Logan's Run, which
Right.
is
Yeah.
about that theme as well, about how
Yeah.
when people get to a certain age, they just automatically kill them off
Yeah.
so that they can control the population. So
Yes.
in a sense, it's kind of a thematically has that sort of preoccupation with population control
Yes.
and things as well, and just a different sort of take on it. But it is interesting, I think, some of the themes and stuff in it. There's a lot of it's worth mentioning too about this concept of the furniture and sort of women's place in this society, because aside from the terrible poverty and the difficulties it would have in raising families,
Yeah.
there's this whole plot around because the film begins with a murder, and it's a murder of Joseph Cotton, who, obviously the great Joseph Cotton,
Yes.
a great film star and one of the Mercury Theater players, one of Orson Welles' pals, a
Right.
great film star of the sort of 40s, 50s, and 60s.
Yep.
And this is again sort of a later film of his. And he's only in it briefly, and he's basically a murder victim. But he is a wealthy man who works for this company. The title comes, Soylent Green comes from the name of a big corporation called
Yes.
Soylent. And he works for that company. And when he gets murdered, Charlton Heston investigates his murder and the circumstances that led to it. And but there's this interesting kind of subplot that these wealthy people have these apartments, and they have these women who come with the flats, and they refer
Yeah.
to them literally as furniture. And so they are actually women who that live in these flats permanently, but whoever comes and buys the flat or owns the flat and lives in the flat, the woman comes as part of the deal.
Yep.
So these women don't have any choice in terms of who they live with, and they just have to be there as sort of general sort of maids and I guess concubines of whoever owns the flat.
Yep.
But in the course of the film, Charlton Heston, develops a relationship of a sort with this woman who lived in Joseph Cotton's flat. But what do you make of that portrayal? This idea that 50 years ago they made this futuristic story, and this is how they portrayed the female characters, young, like sort of young, attractive women. That this is the place that they end up in society.
I guess it's making a sort of feminist point, slightly Handmaid's Tale, that
Mm.
not they're not given any autonomy.
Mm.
Yeah, that was another thing that sort of seemed to make sense within the film, rather than one of the elements that didn't make sense.
Mm.
Yeah, I thought that was a good point there.
Well, yeah, because there's no space for them at all, is there, to have any sort of self-determination at all,
No.
is there? Um, and it's just kind of like an interesting sort of element of the story.
Yeah.
I thought.
Yeah.
Um,
I like the fact, because they're talking about global warming, everybody's incredibly sweaty. Did I mention that earlier on?
yeah, well, yeah, it's very hot, and everybody's always sweating profusely in the film.
Yeah,
and kind of like me in my study here, actually, because it's quite warm. Here,
another thing that's pretty good is that what sort of I spotted is that lots of the people in the crowds are all wearing face masks.
Yeah.
We all know about that now.
Well, apparently it's all been forgotten now, but at one stage it was mandatory.
Yeah.
And like, so the pollution, there's always this kind of thick layer in the air, isn't there, of kind of like this haze in the air that you can sort of see
Yeah.
in these huge crowds. And the crowd control is quite interesting because the police they literally bring in giant sort of trucks with big scoopers on the front.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
this is how they control the crowds. They just drive these big trucks in and just scoop people up like garbage and
Trucks.
throw
Yeah.
them into the back. So that's quite an interesting visual idea of like literally just like there's so many people that they are just treated like just disposable garbage that they just
Yeah.
scoop up like a garbage truck and
Yeah.
just throw them away when they're in the way.
Yeah.
So that's quite an interesting idea as well.
Mm.
So anyway, because I'm quite conscious that I don't want to give the ending away to people who haven't seen it. But was there anything else you wanted to touch on in this film?
Yeah, one thing is that in the euthanasia centre, there's sort of, whilst he's basically on the way out, this Edward G. Robertson's character what is shown a film of the natural world, and the film at the beginning sort of starts and the film ends with this as well, and I quite like that. It's got a sort of nice circular feel to it. I like sort of circular narratives. Not that many of them, but this, I guess that's something I appreciated, and that sort of psychedelic cinema effect feel to it, which was enjoyable as well.
Little film, not quite in the same way, but it kind of reminded me a bit of that moment in The Parallax View, when he goes into that theater and they show him this kind of weird, trippy film to sort of, see how he responds to it emotionally. But
right.
this thing in Soylent Green has a little touch of that as well, but it's all these images of, beautiful natural, fields and meadows and forests and oceans and, little deer running through the overgrowth and all these beautiful images. And it's implied because when Charlton Heston comes in and sees it, that he's never seen any of these things before, that it's just this total sort of like, I never knew that this, was ever
possible.
Existed. This is extraordinary. So there's that implication that all these things, these like sort of like the idea that like someone in the future would look at like a David Attenborough documentary that we kind of see on the BBC all the time, with all this nature footage of animals and stuff, and this idea that if someone was looking at that in the future as something that didn't exist anymore, that wasn't available to them. So that's quite a powerful idea that to look at all this beautiful stuff on the planet, that this scenery and these animals and wildlife and things. I think that because the implication in the film is that all that's gone. That it doesn't exist
you get
anymore.
that in Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, the Philip K. Dick book, which was turned into Blade Runner. And there it's just a great status symbol to have an animal or to have a pet, basically. But if you can't have a real pet, you have an android one, an electric one. So, and I think, the sort of the idea being that sort of nature is virtually extinct. And
and that's quite a powerful idea. And I mean, of course, we know that if that were the case, that like all the things portrayed in the film that they're showing there, that we basically none of this overcrowding and everything would be, we wouldn't be able to become overpopulated because we'd all die out if there was no trees and forests and oceans and all these things. Of course, that'd be the end of us. So this film kind of almost kind of, implies that we could carry on without that stuff, which I don't think is actually accurate at all, because obviously we do live quite symbiotically with, we need flowers and bees and birds and insects and all those things, because we all kind of coexist and sort of there's, feed off each other in a sense, and support each other within our environment. So the idea that all that stuff was gone doesn't quite ring true.
No. Another thing that occurred to me is that the sort of euthanasia centre seemed slightly culty. And I wondered if it was sort of slightly reflecting the sort of 70s, late 60s, 70s worry about cults. Because there were lots of sort of cults around then, the Moonies and the sort of, the Manson family and everything. Well, one thing that the film did get wrong, but for the worse, is the in the flat where the murder happens. There's an enormous hairy armchair, which I thought that looks great. Love one of those. You don't see those now. So they got that wrong about the future. You don't see massive hairy armchairs.
Maybe you could
bring that back.
That would be a business opportunity for you. You could start selling massive hairy armchairs on eBay and
That's it.
Make your fortune.
That's it. That's what I'll do.
But just make sure that you are carbon neutral when you're
entirely carbon neutral hairy armchair.
Anyway, on that note, I hope listeners that you enjoyed the conversation and while you sat in your big hairy armchair listening to us. And I guess we should just say, because we usually do, is just how can you get a hold of Soylent Green? If people want to watch Soylent Green after listening to our conversation, where could they find Soylent Green?
Well, they, again, like Dark Waters, it's available on Google Play Movies, Apple TV, Amazon Prime TV, or Amazon Prime Video, and YouTube.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
And I, of course, being a bit old-fashioned, I watched it on a Blu-ray. I got a little set that's got that Soylent Green, the Omega Man, also with Charlton Heston.
All right.
And that Logan's Run that I talked about.
Oh, yes.
In a little set of 3 films, kind of all dystopian science fiction films.
Right, terrific.
And so I have no idea whether you can still get that, but I'm quite sure that Soylent Green would not be hard to come by on physical media.
I'm sure it wouldn't
either. So if however this is a fairly well-known, popular, classic film.
Yeah.
So I think it would not be hard to come by. So if you're interested in seeing it, I would imagine you just need to type it in a search engine somewhere, and it'll become readily available.
It's even spoofed in The Simpsons, I think, isn't it?
Yes, quite possibly. There is a famous, which I won't say now, but there is quite a famous quote from this film.
Yeah.
That, like I said, that even for people who've never seen it, a lot of people know that just from because it's kind of in the popular culture as a famous film reference. So if you've never seen it before, you should see it, because it is an entertaining film and it's very interesting.
It's good
in a lot of ways as well.
Yep.
It's just a kind of a cool sort of Charlton Heston, middle-aged, swaggering man running around solving crime and getting into fist fights and shoot 'em ups and solving mysteries and things. And it's so it's entertaining film to watch. So it's worth checking out.
Definitely, I recommend it.
Yeah. So on that note, folks, I think we might call it a day there. Thanks very much for tuning in and listening. And Jonathan, thanks again for joining me for a conversation. And
Thank you very much.
And it was awesome. I think we're both going on holiday, aren't we, over the next couple of weeks?
Yep.
Not together, but we're at the same time, just simultaneously, we're going on holidays with our families.
Yes.
So Jonathan, we'll obviously catch up with a new episode after the holidays. I don't think from a listener's point of view it's going to affect us very much, because this will come out at the usual time, and then we'll be back a couple weeks later. And obviously in the meantime, check us out on social media. We're out there. Check us out on YouTube, especially because we put up some videos and stuff. Our famous, fabulous, funky fantabulous factoids are
Absolutely.
there on
Check
our
'em out.
YouTube channel. And we also do other little silly bits and pieces to have a bit of fun. So by all means, check us out there and come back and see us in a couple of weeks.
Please
All right?
do.
So in the meantime, go out and watch some cool films. And by all means, reach out to us as well. Send us a message if there's any cool films you want to tell us about or you want to recommend or anything. We're open to hearing from you. So come out and find us. All right. So we'll see you next time, listeners. Take care until then. We'll see you soon. Cheers.
Bye.
Oh, the things these nerdy middle-aged men get up to.